They said the singing came from a locked room. No instruments, no audience, no teacher, just a voice, rising through the floorboards of a church that had been sealed for 30 years. In the winter of 1847, in a forgotten town pressed between river fog and rot, people began hearing a sound that did not belong to the living. A voice that did not echo the room it occupied. A voice that did not follow the laws of breath, pitch, or human learning. It was opera. Full, cathedral-filling opera, emerging from the throat of a black woman who, according to every record that survived, had never heard a single sound in her life. They would later write her name carefully in ledgers, as if afraid the ink itself might scream. Elizabeth Greenfield. But that was not the name she was born with. And the church where the singing began, that was never meant to be reopened. Elizabeth was born in chains, but not into noise. Plantation records from the late 1820s describe her as unresponsive to bells, calls, or punishment. Overseers believed she was slow. Ministers believed she was touched by something worse. She did not flinch at gunshots. She did not turn when screamed at. She did not cry when other children wailed. She lived in a world without vibration, and yet she watched mouths carefully, studied throats, followed breath the way others followed scripture. When she hummed, softly, uncertainly, the sound came out wrong. Too clean, too centered, not like a child guessing at music, like someone remembering it. Slaves whispered that she sang in her sleep, but she had never heard lullabies, never heard hymns, never heard her own voice echo, which raised a question no one dared ask aloud. Who taught her the sound of God? When Elizabeth was taken north, freed on paper, but not in spirit, she was placed under the care of a religious institution that no longer exists. The church did not advertise itself as an orphanage. It called itself a house of correction for the spiritually unformed. Children who could not hear, children who could not speak, children who could not pray properly. The church believed silence was closer to holiness than sound. They kept records obsessively, but removed names. And in those records, Elizabeth appears suddenly, fully grown, already singing. Not trained, not practiced, documented as producing tones beyond instruction. When asked how she knew the notes, she wrote on slate, "I feel them behind my eyes." The clergy did not celebrate this. They locked doors. Her first public performance was not announced. It happened accidentally, when a visiting benefactor walked past a closed chapel and stopped breathing. Witnesses later testified that the singing caused physical effects. Men wept uncontrollably. Women fainted. One minister vomited and could not explain why. Elizabeth stood at the altar, eyes closed, hands still, producing a soprano line that matched European opera scores she had never seen. Perfect phrasing, correct breath placement, impossible accuracy. The benefactor left immediately. Within weeks, the church forbade Elizabeth from singing inside sacred walls. Within months, 3 members of the clergy resigned without explanation, and one disappeared. No grave, no record, just a final note written in the margin of the ledger. The voice remembers what the body should not. The church basement was not listed on any architectural drawing. Visitors were shown the chapel, the dormitories, the refectory, but never the lower level. There was no staircase in public view, no doors marked for access. And yet, every winter, heat rose from beneath the stone floor as if something living still breathed below. Elizabeth discovered it by accident. While cleaning the nave, she felt a vibration through her bare feet, a faint, rhythmic pressure like breath passing through ribs. She knelt, pressed her palm to the floor. The vibration stopped. That night, she wrote a single sentence on her slate. "Someone is practicing." The clergy confiscated the slate. The next morning, a new rule was posted. No one was to sing alone. Ever. 3 men were assigned to Elizabeth after that incident. They did not introduce themselves. They did not speak. They communicated with gestures so precise they bordered on ritual. They guided her posture, adjusted her jaw, pressed fingers gently into her ribs, her back, her throat, correcting something she had never been taught wrong. They never demonstrated sound. Instead, they placed her hands against their chests and waited. Elizabeth later wrote that when she touched them, she felt movement without noise, as if sound had been stripped of air and left only intention. These sessions took place after midnight, always below the floor. A fire in 1851 damaged part of the church archive. What survived was never meant to. A bundle of ledgers, waterlogged, smoke-stained, was found hidden behind a false wall in the sacristy. They were not hymnals, not sermons. They were catalogs, dates, measurements, descriptions of vocal range. And next to each entry, a symbol carved deep into the paper, a spiral broken by a vertical line. Some entries were crossed out violently. Others ended with a single word. Released. There were at least 12 names before Elizabeth's. None appeared in census records. None appeared in burial grounds. The earliest dated back to 1803. Elizabeth learned the meaning of that word when she was taken deeper than ever before. Past the instruction room. Past the storage vaults. Past the place where the air smelled old and wet. They brought her to a chamber with benches worn smooth by knees. On the far wall were iron hooks. Not for punishment, for positioning. At the center of the room was a circular opening in the floor, covered by a grate. From it came a pressure so intense Elizabeth staggered backward. The men gestured for her to sing. When she refused, one of them wrote on a slate she had not been given before. If you do not release it, it will choose another. Elizabeth sang, and something below the grate answered. It did not sound human, not because it was monstrous, but because it was too complete. No breath, no strain, no error. It followed Elizabeth's melody precisely, then diverged, elaborating, correcting, surpassing. She felt it align her spine, open her ribs, pull tone from places she did not know existed. Her voice changed that night. Witnesses later described it as older, as if time itself had found a throat. When Elizabeth was finally allowed to perform publicly, the church controlled everything. Venue, repertoire, duration. But one town, a river settlement already half abandoned, broke the rules. They let her sing too long. As her final note sustained, windows cracked. Livestock panicked. People reported hearing multiple voices inside a single sound. Elizabeth collapsed. When she woke, she could feel the floor vibrating, even miles away from the church. That town was later erased by flood. Officially, unofficially, locals said the river had begun singing first. By the early 1850s, Elizabeth Greenfield's name began appearing in newspapers. Not the truth, a version. They called her the Black Swan. They called her a miracle of nature. They called her untutored genius. What they did not call her was deaf. What they did not mention was the church. Public fame was not freedom. It was containment. By turning Elizabeth into a spectacle, institutions ensured she would never be investigated. Curiosity dissolves when it is fed carefully. Mystery becomes novelty. Terror becomes applause. Every performance was tightly controlled. Every note timed. Every venue inspected. She was never allowed to sing alone for more than 11 minutes. Because that was the longest interval before the answering began. The first recorded anomaly occurred in Boston. Elizabeth was scheduled to perform, but fell ill and did not appear. The audience waited. And then they heard her. A soprano line emerged from the hall itself. Not from the stage. Not from any throat. The sound seemed to rise from the walls, the rafters, the very air vibrating in sympathy. Some swore they saw her shadow behind the curtain. Others claimed the voice came from inside their own chests. The concert was canceled. Refunds issued. The incident buried. But one reviewer wrote a single sentence before his paper was shut down. The voice no longer requires the woman. Europe did not want Elizabeth. Europe wanted the source. Letters arrived, sealed with wax, written in Latin, German, French. Invitations to perform in cathedrals older than the nation itself. Offers of private instruction from men whose names never appeared in music history. The church refused all of them. Instead, Elizabeth was sent on a carefully routed American tour, always near rivers, always near churches built atop older foundations. She began reporting sensations. That she could feel singing before she opened her mouth. That sometimes her body adjusted pitch without her intention. That occasionally, she heard something, not sound, but pressure shaped like memory. She wrote once, "It knows where I am." After Elizabeth left the city, choirs began to change. Untrained singers suddenly achieved impossible harmonies. Congregations sang hymns with intervals no American church had ever used. Children who could not read music began correcting adults. And always, someone disappeared. A tenor who wandered into the river at night. A choir boy found humming alone in the cellar, throat torn raw. A minister who sealed himself inside the organ chamber and was never recovered. The pattern repeated. Elizabeth was blamed quietly, but never publicly. In 1853, a journalist insisted on interviewing Elizabeth alone. No clergy, no handlers, no observers. The transcript survives, but was never printed. She was asked a simple question. How do you hear the music? Elizabeth paused, then wrote slowly. I don't hear it. I remember it. Pressed further, she added. It existed before mouths, before churches, before names. The journalist asked where it came from. Elizabeth's final response filled the page. From the place where voices go when they are taken away. The journalist vanished within a month. His boarding room was empty, but neighbors reported singing for weeks afterward. Elizabeth stopped singing. Not gradually, not publicly. She simply closed her mouth one morning and refused to open it again. Concerts were canceled. Patrons complained. Clergy applied pressure, spiritual, financial, moral. None of it worked. She would not sing, not even in sleep. For weeks, nothing happened. And then the buildings began to react. Churches she had once performed in reported strange disturbances. Organs playing without hands. Hymnals falling open to the same page. Choirs waking at dawn with blood on their lips and no memory of singing. Silence, it seemed, was not an option. Elizabeth wrote a final sentence in her private journal. If I do not give it voice, it will take voices instead. Against every warning, Elizabeth returned to the institution that had shaped her. The church was officially closed by then. Condemned. Its congregation scattered. But the foundation remained intact, and the lower level was still warm. She went alone. Neighbors reported seeing light beneath the doors long after midnight. Not candlelight, something steadier, pulsing. Inside, Elizabeth descended past the old instruction rooms, past the iron hooks, past the chamber with the grate. The opening was uncovered. Whatever had been below was no longer contained. The floor had worn thin from years of resonance. Stone curved inward, as if drawn toward a center that breathed. Elizabeth stood at the edge and sang once more. Not opera. A single sustained tone. The sound did not rise. It spread. Witnesses miles away later claimed they heard singing emerge from wells, chimneys, riverbanks, even their own walls. Every voice joined, trained or not, willing or not. An entire town sang without understanding why. Harmony locked in, pitch stabilized, breath synchronized, and then separation. Some voices fell silent forever. When dawn came, the church had collapsed inward. No fire, no explosion, just absence, like a throat closing. Elizabeth Greenfield was not found among the ruins, nor below them. Officially, Elizabeth Greenfield retired. That is the version preserved. Unofficially, her final tour dates simply stop. No death notice, no burial, no farewell performance. But something else changed. American sacred music shifted. Intervals once considered impossible became common. Certain hymns were quietly rewritten. Choir directors warned singers not to hold notes too long. And deaf children across the country began humming melodies no one had taught them. Perfectly. The final surviving document related to Elizabeth Greenfield is not musical. It is architectural. A report advising churches to reinforce foundations, avoid circular basements, and never, under any circumstances, build directly over natural cavities. The report ends with a handwritten addition. Sound does not disappear. It waits. In 1878, the first experimental sound recordings were made in America. Crude, fragile, barely intelligible. And yet, archivists later noticed something impossible. Embedded in several early wax cylinder tests was a faint soprano line. Not background noise. Not mechanical distortion. A voice. Perfectly pitched. Sustained longer than human lungs allow. The recordings were made in different cities. Different years. Different operators. But the voice was the same. When slowed down, the waveform matched contemporary transcriptions of Elizabeth Greenfield's performances. A woman who had vanished decades earlier. A woman who, officially, had never been recorded at all. A small group of acousticians proposed a theory so disturbing it was dismissed without rebuttal. They suggested that Elizabeth Greenfield had not produced the voice. She had stabilized it. That certain spaces, churches, caverns, foundations, retained sound the way bodies retain trauma. That under the right conditions, resonance could become self-sustaining. A voice without a throat. A choir without mouths. Elizabeth, they argued, had been born without hearing because she did not need it. She was not meant to listen, only to align. The paper was rejected. The lead author lost his position. The archives where his research was stored were flooded months later. Even now, the reports continue. Choir directors who hear an extra voice during rehearsal, perfectly on pitch, but not belonging to any singer. Sound engineers who find a soprano line embedded in silent recordings. Deaf individuals who dream of singing in languages they do not know. And always, when the melody is traced back far enough, it resolves into the same structure, the same phrasing, the same voice. Elizabeth Greenfield's The Final Theory, never written, only whispered, is this. Elizabeth did not die. She dispersed. Her body was never recovered because it no longer contained her. The voice had learned to exist without flesh, and she went with it. Not ascension, not possession, integration. She became the interface between silence and sound. The last human boundary. The story of Elizabeth Greenfield is not taught as horror. It is taught as inspiration. A miracle, a triumph, a curiosity. But that version leaves something out. Every culture has rules about music, limits on duration, repetition, perfection. Not because of aesthetics, because some sounds do not want to stop. Elizabeth Greenfield was born deaf not as a defect, but as protection for everyone else. And if you are listening closely right now, if the room feels slightly fuller than it should, if the silence seems to lean toward you, do not sing back.